My name's Heather Violanti. I'm the moderator of the Talkback. And just to let you know how it'll go, we have our theme Talkback, and then at the end we're going to leave room for questions, and you can ask general questions that you might have about the play or about things our speakers have said. So we will have time for questioning at the end. And now just to do brief introductions. Here right next to me is Ludovica Villar-Hauser.
Hello.
She is the founder and artistic and executive director of Parity Productions. Mm-hmm. And then we have Gayle Damiano Waxenberg. And she is founding executive director of New York Rep. And as I understand it, New York Rep is one of the co-producers of tonight's production. And then we have Sarah Norris, who directed the show.
Woohoo!
And you're also one of the founders of New Light Theater Project, or one of the producers of the show.
What about you?
Oh yes, and I'm getting my phone out so I can time it. And yes, my name is Heather. I am the moderator, and I am a dramaturg and a playwright as well. So tonight's topic is really something that interests me. Parity in theater, because part of my work as a dramaturg is working on parity and plays by women. Now I've read that, just recently in 2019, only 13 productions on Broadway, 13% of the productions produced on Broadway in 2019 were directed by women. So it's still an issue of achieving parity in the theater. Now this production, I noticed, had an all-female-led production team. Was that a deliberate choice on your part?
It was, yes. Thanks for that question, Heather. Mm-hmm. Yes, I spoke with Michelle back in 2018. We decided to work on this production together, and Michelle's the playwright. And we felt it was really important to the project and the overall outcome of the play to really focus on a female-led team across the board. And so assembling that team and looking through my contacts, I realized I would work with a female designer here and there, but to have so many female voices in the room, I had never experienced that before. And I've been working for a couple of decades as a director, and it was shocking the first production meeting to sit around the table, and everybody around the table was a female designer, a female stage manager, and all of us at the table said, we've never done this before. And it just struck me as how is that an odd thing? And it just felt weird for all of us. And it was so freeing once we started working and talking about the play and bringing it to life together. So it's been in my heart and my mind, and which is what led me to Parity Productions and the work that they do in supporting parity in this industry. It's so important. And I think I found some of my designers from the database that I didn't know any female sound designers. I didn't even know where to start, and asking around, friends didn't know who to recommend. So I think that's where that was my approach to this play. Is it felt like it had to be a female-driven team. So
thank you. And Ludovica and Gayle, could you tell us more about your work in your organizations and how you strive to achieve parity in your work?
Sure. So our work is generally all social justice themed productions. And I come from the point of view that everything should serve the production best. We look to put teams together that serve the production best, deliver the most authenticity. So if you're looking at a production like Hitler's Tasters, that's about a group of women, why would you not have a group of women involved in the production from every step of the way?
You'd think, right?
You think that, right?
You would think that, right?
Right. So I come from that point of view I am a woman who started a not-for-profit theater company, and I find there is a lot of power in joining forces with other women doing the same thing, working hard to put the best production up as possible. And that is not only meaning women, but it's meaning sometimes people of color. If you're putting up a show, for instance, that's about previously incarcerated people, and they're predominantly people of color, then, and they include women as well as men, then those people of color that are men and women should be involved in every aspect of that production. So it follows through, right from the beginning to the end. And so I am all about authenticity, and to that end, empowering women. I met Sarah through our playwright, and I mean, this is just an example of really female collaboration at its best. And I look forward to working with Sarah again because of the way we've been able to be a really powerful dynamic together. Yeah.
And Ludovica, can you talk more about your organization?
Sure.
Parity Productions?
Sure. There's a lot to say, so I'm going to try and just do shorthand. But Parity Productions was founded in 2016, and I always say it's the love child of two companies, Works by Women, which was an advocacy company, and VH Theatrical, which was a theatrical development company. And they had very similar missions, and so it felt a bit silly to be running two not-for-profits, like, hello, it's hard enough running one. So we did that, we brought the best from each company, and what was very important for Parity, we used to, well, it's simplest to say, we center and champion women, trans and gender expansive artists, and we specifically focus on writers, directors and designers. That does not mean we don't like producers or actors or stage managers, but we had to be realistic about what we could manage because we're a small company. But not only that, we also, at the time, needed to look at what needed the most focus, and it was definitely the directors, the writers and the designers, and of those three, the designers were and still are the worst off. If you look at sound designers, it can go as low as 8% in a year. I mean, it's ridiculous actually. I can't even talk about it, I get so upset. I mean, 13% of women directors, hello! We are over 50% of the population, and then if you add the trans and gender expansive community, we're obviously larger than that. So what you can't do, I learned that when I was really young, is tell people off. You can't tell them, well, you're wrong and you need to do it differently. It doesn't work. You can't shame them, you can't embarrass them, you can't smack on the head. So the best way is to lead by example. Obviously we're not perfect, but we try. And so our record is somewhere between 80 and 100% in terms of hiring practices. But we want to encourage the industry to have hiring practices of 50%, because that's fair, right? So we have two programs, and I'll talk about one because the other one is sort of on hiatus because the theatre's been on hiatus. But the database that you spoke about is a database. They're free profiles for writers, directors and designers to be found so they can be hired, and people can also find collaborators. And this is important because, like you, there were years ago when I didn't know who to look for when I was looking for people to hire. And out of that need came the database. And also, I was really tired of hearing, I don't know any women writers. Oh, I don't know any directors either. Oh, designers, no. So it just thought, right, okay, that excuse has got to go. And that's where the database was born. So I'll stop there because I really could go on for hours. Too boring.
Thank you. You had mentioned how important it is to find these production teams that reflect the work that's on stage. How does it affect the work on stage to have teams that reflect the story that's being told? How does that impact the storytelling?
Well, if I may, I'll give an example based on this show. Originally, Michelle and I worked on this play at a theater in New Jersey. It was great, and we learned so much about the play. But the design team for that production was the costume designer was female, the rest of the team were all male.
Surprise.
I know. And I, particularly with the sound designer, I said, oh, you know, I want it to feel young, I want it to be, you know, I remember being a kid and dancing to Madonna with my friends, like I want it to, and I just remember, he looked at me and goes, I don't get it. And I said, well, I want it to feel really like young girls, like playing in their room, like I want to feel that. And he just said, I don't get it. And so I went in and figured out the music that I just wanted to. I love collaborating with designers. It's one of my favorite things, but I felt very shut out by that process. So it was the music, which I still loved. I mean, I picked it out. The music I loved in that, but it wasn't what I really wanted. I really wanted something quite different. So meeting Carson through the database, what she did was she found New York musicians, and we brought that into the process. Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot of new musicians by doing this work, and so that to me, it was just in bringing this story together and what was important to me. There just wasn't the communication wasn't there between the designers and myself, and it just, in my opinion, really elevated when I started working with Carson. I keep talking about Carson. I love all of the designers in this particular production, but I think, yes, sound designer is such a role that is predominantly male-driven in the industry. So I think that's kind of the easiest one for me to think about, was feeling very shut down when talking about my music ideas initially.
I think for me, working with the teams that you really want to be working with is extremely liberating and extremely exciting, because you do actually, for the most part, have a common language. And there's a lot of the stuff that one doesn't have to deal with. Whatever the stuff is, can be different things on different days for different people, right? But there's a shorthand, and everyone usually is excited to be there. And everyone likes the fact that, like you said, wow, it's all women or trans, whatever the combination is, but it just feels different, which it shouldn't. It really shouldn't anymore, but it does.
Yeah, we recently we're working on a piece called inmate.com, and I referred to before about prison reform, and it dealt with incarcerated people, and the central character was female, and her story, what that landed her in prison, had to do with domestic abuse. She also gave birth in prison, okay, and she talked about how, you know, she wasn't even able to buy tampons in prison. And so these are just highlights of what was female driven in the story. So there was no way that play was going to be developed without a female director. And you couldn't possibly get the right emotion and relationship between the actor and the director without there being a female-oriented director and other females working on this piece, both in terms of the sensitivity around domestic abuse. I mean, there are real issues here that having a man address that scene would have just been devastating, you know, all the way around. So that is what I mean wholeheartedly when I say it has to serve the authenticity of the production, and in this instance, it really is the safety of the actors who have to get into that role, and then the people who are seeing themselves performed on stage as well. So there's a lot of dynamics involved.
Well, that's a really good point. It reminded me of the recent Broadway debut of Alice Childress in Trouble in Mind, and that whole story is about she's a woman and she's African American and she's not represented at all in this production team, and just the struggle she had to go through and her character that she created in this play, and it just you know, hearing your stories today just reminded me so much of that work and the importance of work like that in theater history. Now, going back to the play that we've just seen, you know, at first glance, these women seem to be women of privilege. You know, been chosen to taste Hitler's food, but how do you think lack of parity has affected them? How has lack of parity gotten them to this position that they're in the play?
Well, they don't have power, right?
Right.
So, right there,
Yeah.
they didn't get asked.
No.
Would you like to do this? Good thing.
Lack of choice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because I was struck at another Talkback. Michelle said, you know, if Hitler says eat your peas, you eat your peas. So it's almost like they don't have a choice, and because they're young women, they're sort of put in this position.
They're the most disposable.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, they were
Yes.
totally disposable. And that was, you know, that young female women were totally disposable. You know, not young men, you know, they were the disposable members of society.
Yes, no, that's a really good point. Good point.
I mean, also, the men were needed to fight. I mean, I'm not suggesting that war is good. I'm just saying at that time, that is how it all worked out. So, what do you have? It's like, you know, in America, so many women, and in England, had great jobs when there were no men around. They were running the place. And then we had all those issues when they came back, and they're like, well, out the way now, I'm back. And it's like, yeah, no, but I can't go back to the way it was before. I mean, so, you know, it's so many questions, so many things, right?
Yes, no, that's a good point. One other question I had, going back to parity in the theater, how do you think working towards parity in the theater, how does that have broader repercussions in society?
Well, I don't know, let's see what else answer that, because again, I could do half an hour on this one.
That's such a big question.
Well, no. I think you have to see yourself. Like, if you want the next generation, and you have, you know, everything I think most of us do, besides making it right for now and where we sit, is to always make it better for the next, right? And so, you know, one of the ways you do is you want to see, people need to see themselves. So, you know, one of the things that I feel very strongly about that we do is we have fellowship programs for college students, and they are female. We fill those roles with female students. And, you know, they get to follow a director or, you know, follow a stage manager. And, you know, I want people who are studying these roles, whether they're students, whether they're young in their professions, to come to a show like this and see who they could be.
It's very important.
Yeah.
I didn't have that when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is important.
I think it's why a lot of people leave the business. A lot of women is they just feel disheartened and they're never gonna break in. So I agree with you completely. Like, we have to make these opportunities. We have to, you know, scream it from the rooftops that we're supporting women.
Incest in a way, if you think about it.
Yes, it is.
It's an incestuous thing that has to be broken, because if you think about it, cousins marrying cousins and in royal families, when all that was going on, things started to go really wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
The madness came and other things happened, because you aren't really supposed to mate with your family. It's not natural. And there's a reason for it, right? So, scientific reason. And I feel that that's the same in society and in the theatre, because they're connected, right? And we must tell the stories of all the people that make up our society, because we are growing inwards. And I think we've seen that the last 20 years, politically speaking. That's a whole other subject, but it just feels very incestuous, it feels very diseased, it feels very unhealthy. You know, when we have so many stories and perspectives, why are we not hearing them? What are we so afraid of? And that's kind of where I come from. It's like, it's much more interesting.
Well, we're
Right?
not afraid. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean.
I don't think we're afraid.
Yeah.
No.
I think people are afraid of us. Oh no, I don't think we're afraid.
Yeah, we're not afraid.
You know, when
Um,
Rachel Chavkin say that amazing quote,
Yeah.
we're ready, go.
Yeah, I agree.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, Rachel Chavkin, if you don't know, when she won the Tony in 2019 for Best Director, she really made a plea for representing women in theater. She said, there are so many women who are ready to go. There are so many artists of color who are ready to go. And we need to see that racial diversity and gender diversity reflected in our critical establishment too. So that's such a good point that, we have to be, we are ready to go, and people just have to be ready to see it.
Well,
Yeah.
there's also something else which is really important, and it makes me crazy because, so when you talk about, well, why don't you hire more people and like more, more diverse, from more of a diverse pool? What if they're not very good? It's like, okay, I understand your fear, but you need to try. And not everyone's going to be brilliant, I understand, but not everyone is brilliant anyway every
Right.
day. So it's okay. But there's also something else. The less opportunity we have, the less chance we actually have of being any good. And the more we're going to prove them bloody right.
That's right.
You haven't got the
Yeah.
experience, okay,
Yeah.
you can't go straight from 0 to Broadway, got it. But you've got to do it. And the problem is, and this is one of the things we found out when we were doing statistics, which was a few years ago, so a lot of women, trans and non-binary people are at the sort of lower rungs of what we call indie theatre, right? So the showcases and all of that, if we picked colours and we did a triangle, we'd be all over the place. And this is actually true because we did this. So as you go further up the triangle, and you're talking about regional theatre or paid off Broadway or Broadway, suddenly we do this thing called a disappearing act. And that's a problem. Why? Because it's okay to let us do the stuff that isn't actually, high risk and don't earn very much. But if you keep doing that, that's not sustainable. So that is why women, trans, and gender, expansive people are leaving the theatre. They can't afford to stay in it. It's a reality, So anyway, sorry, I told you to talk for hours.
No, it's a really good point, because the study that I was looking at in 2019, it pointed out that once women get into their 30s and 40s, they tend to leave the profession because they just can't afford to stay in and to keep working at sustenance level positions. So it is something that I know theater is striving to change, and you're all striving to change in your work. So that's very, it's great to know that you're here helping to make change. Before I open up to questions, is there anything else you want to say about Parity and the female-led path of Parity in theater?
Well, I would say you should check out Parity Productions and sign up if you're a designer. I've recommended that database many times, and it's divided into union, non-union. It's a very thorough database, and I recommend women. Go to shows by women that are supporting women. Go out and see that work. If they get a bad review, go see it anyway. Please ignore the reviews. It just keeps supporting that.
Well, excuse
work.
me, who's reviewing it? Hello? We're back to the same thing. Yeah, no, I think we have this program called Qualifying Productions where if you have more than 50%, and this is the thing we parked to one side because of the pandemic, and we're looking at bringing it back, but which we talked about, the qualifying productions. So if 50% or more of your creative team, designers, writers and directors, that is what we do. If you're hiring that, if you have that hiring standard, then we will promote you, do a press release, have you on the website, do social media, all that good stuff. And that is why it is actually important to see that we can bring back that program, because you saying go and see the work, people don't know what that work is.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why we have to say, look, put your money where your mouth is. These are the productions, check them out. But if you don't know, we can't blame you. Then where's the information? So, you've convinced me. We've got to find a way.
Find a way.
Right, and what is it, the organization, the League of Theatre Women?
League of Professional
The
Theatre
Theatre
Women.
Women, a very good organization also, and they really help promote, women in theater in all aspects, their productions, if they're working on them. But I still come to, if you want to be true to the work, the Parity will rise from the bottom up. And, if you don't listen to what you should be doing and just do what's right for the production, it will, and the cream will rise to the top, and you'll find that you are using women, you are using people of color, you are using people who represent the communities that you're talking about.
As long as you pick the playwrights that are within those communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then of course
Right.
you're authentic. And
That's right,
correct.
and it's just
Yeah.
a beautiful thing when that happens.
Yeah.
It's true.
No, that's a really good point, to pick playwrights that are representative.
Absolutely, and even if the playwright isn't, I mean, you can always take a playwright and a dramaturg, right, and put them together to get authentic. I mean, there's so many ways you can make sure the communities are represented
Yes,
and give opportunities to more artists.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great point.
Mhm.
Well, I guess we could open up to questions. Does anyone have any questions about what we said, or questions in general about the play? Yes, you.
Thank you. I guess I am curious if there was an aha moment for you at any point in this production where you thought, oh, this moment might not have happened if I didn't have the creative team that I do. Like, do you have any moments where you felt the gender parity of your creative team come through?
Definitely. I mean, so I'll do my best to repeat the question. So the question was, did I have any aha moments when working on the show in terms of the designers contributing in such a way that I learned something about the play? Am I saying this correctly?
I guess I'm sorry. I'm trying to ask. Like you said, you had never worked with an all-female creative team before, and I'm wondering if there was anything that happened during the creative process where you were like, oh, this may not have happened without an all-female creative team.
I think the best way I can answer that is there was just such a comfortability with the team that I don't know, women tend to apologize a lot. I think you just apologized. For this show, we had like a quarter jar. If you apologize, you put a quarter in it. I think there was just such a shorthand, and it was very relaxed. And I work with a lot of men designers and that I love, but there was just something about this room where it was just freeing in a different way, and we're sharing experiences of what it's like to be young and embarrassing. It was just, there was an openness to the group that I didn't have the first time I did the show. And there was just a lot more ideas too. I mean, people just had more ideas about it and what it's like to be a young, and obviously, people have ideas about that. So I think something cracked open for this production that wasn't necessarily in the first production that Michelle and I worked on together. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any? That's a great question. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't know. See, I'm about to apologize.
Where's your quarter?
Because I don't have a question, but I have a comment and an observation. Okay. Okay. So my comment was, I think one of the best endorsements for an all-female team is what I saw tonight. This experience in the theater was amazing. I completely, fully realized on every level, and I come into a house like this so that 42nd Street, it'll all go away, and that completely happened. I was absolutely captivated, so I wanted to thank you for that. But my observation was interesting, because Sarah, what you said was, how these young women were disposable, and I just made this connection. Interesting, these were young women at the time who were considered disposable, and we have a situation that happens now on the screen, hopefully more so than the theater, when women are a certain age and reach that age, that they become disposable. So
Invisible, yeah.
Yeah, very good point.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for that point. That's a really good point. Women becoming disposable at a certain age in the profession, acting, and even just in the production world as well. I think you do see it, because they can't keep taking these low-paying jobs, or there's less demand for women of an older age. traditionally, I think it is changing in the profession. Do you think?
It has to come down to the plays.
Yeah.
If you pick the plays, the playwrights, I mean, you will get the parts.
Yeah.
I think that is, you know, Cindy, you've got huge responsibility. Cindy's a playwright, and whoever else is a playwright in the room. Yeah, I mean, you've got to pick those plays, and then we'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. Any other questions? Yes, you.
So what is your advice as a new upcoming artist, as a director and an actor and, you know, a writer? What is your advice into breaking this barrier and, you know, to get into that level, like Broadway level or like possibility? Because like you said, it's difficult, you know, especially being a person of color and especially being a woman. Like, what is your advice for?
Are you a director?
Yeah.
Do you want to go with this, or should I?
And you start, yeah.
Well, firstly, good luck. Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, try to get involved with people who are creating the work and become part of creating the work. It is the only way I know. There might be better routes. Like, if I'd been smart, maybe I'd have started off as an assistant or something, but I just didn't want to go that way. And so I ended up always creating my own work. I don't know that that's the best way, but that's one of the ways of just get involved. You know, go to the plays that speak to you, see if you can help, volunteer in some way. You know, I don't know if you can join the union, I don't know if you can join the League of Professional Theatre Women. I mean, those organizations and groups that speak to you, you know, where you feel welcome.
Yeah.
You know, I think to me that's the only way. I mean, it's a really difficult industry to break into, but I also believe that we create. It's not an industry in that way. We are the creators.
Yeah.
So create,
Right.
right? Nobody can stop you. Just do it. I mean, I know that sounds really crazy. It's like, well, how do you do it? You'll find a way. If you want it, you'll find a way. You know, I always said to my mom, how could you afford to have children? I never had any money, right? And she's like, just do it. I was like, but how? I mean, I just didn't understand it. You know, children are expensive. You know, they need all this stuff, you know, and education, and I don't know, they should be fed 3 times a day. My God, I forget. But I mean, the point is, you do it. If this is what you want to do, and this is your path, you'll find a way. But believe in yourself.
There are a number of coalitions and not-for-profit organizations that started during COVID that support, they're just to support and network artists of color. And if you contact me, I'll be able to make an introduction for you. And I've used them to identify talent. I know one of the producers who started one of them personally. They're a great resource, and I'm sure they do networking. The gentleman I know is a Broadway producer as well as off-Broadway producer, and so I mean these are people like, you know, making change.
Great. It's very good.
No, that's a really good point. Sarah, do you have anything?
I mean, I agree with all of that. What is your name?
Oh, my name is Shameli.
Smelly, okay, yes. I think it's meeting people, and
Yeah.
I mean, I think both of you said it. It's going out, it's meeting people, it's which is hard to do, especially during COVID. You don't want to meet people you don't know, but it's hard to say, I'm a director, hire me. But it's showing up and joining organizations and making your own stuff if you can, even if it's in the park, and you know you're doing it that way, because it's always the experience, right? It's I figured out this play, maybe 5 people passing by in the park saw it, but I figured it out, and so it's just kind of becoming more confident in your own ability too, I think, because for me at least, I become confident the more I do something.
Absolutely.
Sure, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And every time before I start directing, I'm convinced I'm not, even coming on stage here, I'm like, I don't know, I might not have anything to say. I might go blank, I don't know. I mean, it's those nerves, or I don't know if it's nerves, but it's that, I suppose, I don't know, insecurity, aren't we all a bit insecure? Like,
Human nature.
right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good point, to network and be confident. And and just create your work, you know. Yeah, but that was such a good question. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions about what we said or the play? Any questions? Yes.
I appreciate the very important asterisk that you're putting on of trans and gender expansionist professionals, and I was wondering, often you see trans actors who are brought into roles specifically to play, like, oh, I need a role of trans pain, and we're going to get a trans actor for this. Do you see a lot more sort of trans actors, but also like crew and staff, sort of bringing on more just normal roles?
It's very, very interesting. It's called trans porn, and the trans industry is like, we're sick of it, okay? And I do, because that's my world, and I think it's great that we are seeing change. What we don't have it with women either, is statistics.
Yeah.
They are just beginning to happen, and numbers matter. And the more we can say who we are, what we're doing, how the importance of, I think that I just feel that is something we need to absolutely focus on. But that's not your question. I do. I think things are changing. We do 2 commissions a year. One is to a woman, so it can be a trans woman, it can be a cis woman, it doesn't matter. And one is to either a trans or gender expansive playwright. And so for us, we're seeing that anyway. So I probably can't answer the question in terms of bigger picture, because I'm sort of myopic. But what I did want to say, which is going back to your question, I think and you talk about authenticity. If we could only shed what we're supposed to do and really acknowledge and own who we actually are, and this is all of us, I think the answers will come. I really do. And that sounds like so hippy-dippy, but I think it's true. Follow your own drummer, your own bliss. And it's about being authentic. It's about being you. Nobody else is going to be you. They can't be you because you're you. That job's been taken. And I don't know how to explain it, but especially when you're a director, that is your voice. No one else is going to have that voice. And copying somebody else or how they're doing it is not going to get you very far. What you have is something someone else doesn't have. It's you. And we're not raised to believe that. We've got to start believing it, because that is where the change is. And that is also addressing your question a little bit, because it's to do with, no, I'm not going to start telling you about my trauma. I've got other stories to tell, for God's sakes. You know what I'm saying? Those are the interesting areas.
I do think stereotyped casting is changing. I've seen it change, both in terms of LGBTQ casting and all other types of stereotypes. I don't think there's statistics, but I am pleasantly surprised to see a lot of it shedding, by the way. Yeah.
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. Does anyone have any more questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much, Sarah and Gayle and Ludovica. Any last words?
Thank you for coming to the theatre.
Yeah, thank you.
That's what I
Yeah,
wanted to say.
thank you to you.